obviously the quarterback is going to stand up as the leader of the team and say, this is on me. I need to play better. I need to do better. But how much is Ben Roethlisberger really to blame, Mark, for what's happening with the Steelers
Well,
right
as
now?
you just watch all the highlights, every time he's under duress. And that's going to be an issue. I don't care who you have at the quarterback. I mean, you could have Stretch Armstrong starting for you at quarterback. If you're under duress all the time, you're going to have a tough time completing footballs. You're going to have a tough time actually pushing the ball down the football field. I think there's some other factors here, too. I think the way that we play, when you are an offense that predicates itself on pushing the ball down the football field like the Pittsburgh Steelers like to do. Now, I know they have a great running back, but that great running back wasn't in camp. And there's a lack of continuity offensively with this football team. And you've always predicated yourself on pushing the ball down the field, mixing in the running game and all those things to balance. But because you've been out of whack, because you guys weren't together, because you didn't have your running back in there, and because nobody practices preseason football anymore, the first 3 weeks of the regular season are an extension of the preseason anyway. That's the way we operate now. I mean, you look at your quarterback position, how many reps do you actually get? You don't do two-a-days anymore. You're rarely ever in pads. And this is the effect, the law of unintended consequences of the last collective bargaining agreement is the first 3 weeks of the first 3 weeks of the regular season are an extended preseason. And that's why there's just a lack of continuity. And I've always said this, when it comes to running the football, you can get yourself into a rhythm running the football if you understand how to run the football, if you understand how to run against 8-man boxes and do those things. But when you throw the football and you get out of rhythm, and it's hard to be in rhythm, it's almost impossible to throw yourself back into rhythm. It's a really hard thing to do. And so they have just they're at this point right now. They haven't played well. They haven't protected well. They haven't run the ball well. And, their passing game is off. And that's part of just not being together during training camp.
This is it. 3 games down. You say 3 or 4 games is the extension of the preseason. I mean, they don't have much more time to get things together with all the weapons this team has on paper.
Right. And what's their record? 2-1?
2-1.
Yep.
So 1 loss in overtime.
Right. So you look at it and you say, yeah, it's disappointing. And obviously, you go to Chicago, you lose a game. To me, there's a mental aspect of taking a team lightly because I called the Chicago game the week before, and I didn't think they'd win a game this year based on they're decimated by injuries. Their receiving core is a bunch of also-rans.
Yeah.
No, and I'm not trying to be offensive. I mean, you name a guy.
Very offensive.
Right. you name a guy. Their first couple of draft choices, their number ones are all hurt.
Right.
I mean, so this is a team decimated by injuries, and I think the Steelers mentally, they just overlooked them. They went to Chicago, thought they could just show up because they're the Pittsburgh Steelers and win a football game, and you can't do that.
Let's take Pittsburgh 20 minutes before the national anthem.
Okay.
They were 2-0. Not necessarily producing offensively the way we would like, but they're still 2-0. We don't have a problem with Pittsburgh. Now, we're in Thursday. So now we're starting to get some of the intel of what Pittsburgh was going through internally. Now, we know Mike Tomlin to be one of the great leaders. Ben Roethlisberger expressed his concern for what the team was going to do. What they ultimately end up doing was not something he wanted to do. They also have an Army Reserve, a guy who served 3 tours of duty. He was conflicted. You got a bunch of other African-Americans on the team. They wanted to be on the field to take a knee, to support. So we had all these things going on in Pittsburgh. These aren't football things, but these are football players with other issues, and they have a job to do. Now, the thing I like about Ben was he took responsibility. I'm being paid the most money. I got the ultimate pedigree as a quarterback besides Tom Brady. It's my fault. And offensive football is going to be behind defensive football. All right? What are some of the things they're struggling with? Who gets the ball? L. Bell wants a new contract. So he wants to touch the ball 25 times so he can maximize the ability to be either take advantage of being a free agent or Pittsburgh signed to a long-term contract. All right? He's under the franchise tender this year. Martavius Bryant, one of the great young receivers in the NFL. What was he doing last year? He was watching games like me, suspended. So now we have to get him back into the system. Right. Ben is a veteran quarterback who's only going to practice so much. And based on the new rules, defenses are ahead of the offense. So I would say don't panic. Most NFL teams cut their schedule into 4 quarters. The first 4 games, they're the first quarter. So you'll see teams this week try to either get to 500, either try to get their first win, or like Pittsburgh, get to 3-1 in the first quarter. All right? Because if you go 3-1 2 quarters, you go undefeated 1 quarter. Even if you go 2-2, you're going to make the playoffs. So that's how most teams try to do this. But we're not taking into consideration what Pittsburgh went through, and we might be overreacting. Now, I'm glad Ben took responsibility, but if they're able to go to Baltimore, get a divisional win, this won't even matter going forward.
Cece, you preached about the Steelers and Ben Roethlisberger before the year. There are 2 Pittsburgh Steelers. There are Pittsburgh Steelers at home and the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road. Now, I understand for the audience that might think everyone's better at home. Fine. But Chris's point is there's 2 teams in the league that have emotional leaders, that are emotional teams in Seattle and Pittsburgh, and their home-road splits are the biggest discrepancy in the league, outside of maybe a team like New England that seems to never lose at home. And what we've seen this year from Big Ben, on the road against Cleveland, he was okay. On the road against Chicago, he was okay. At home, against an outstanding Vikings defense, he was extraordinary.
Right.
It was his best game of the year. This is a road game against Baltimore. Now, Baltimore's a team, I have no idea who they are. I know Baltimore can beat the state of Ohio. They beat Cincinnati and Cleveland. And I know that in London, they got their heads handed to them by what I think is a mediocre Jacksonville team. So I'm confused by who Baltimore is. But the home road stuff aside, this is what I'm going to be watching across the league this year. The quarterback class of 2004 should we have seen this year coming. Now, I didn't. I picked two quarterbacks.
Sort of. You had questions about Tom Brady.
I had questions about Tom Brady, but he ain't that quarterback class. And I picked 2 quarterbacks from that class to play in the Super Bowl, Eli and Big Ben. But this class is now in year 14, and what we've seen from Big Ben, his yards per attempt each of the last 4 years, dip. To right now, it's sitting at 6.7. Phillip Rivers, best year of his career 5 years ago. Since then, quarterback rating 106 to 94 to 94 to 88 this year to 82. Eli had his worst year, then Odell got there, and since then, quarterback ratings gone from 92, 92, 86, this year 81. Is it maybe, and I'm not saying this yet, but it's something to watch league-wide with these teams, is it maybe that because Tom Brady's still playing at a high level, because Drew Brees is still playing at a really high level, we forgot that Big Ben's 35, Eli's 36, Phillip Rivers 35, and that draft class, it's about time for them to start deteriorating.
And I think the numbers are a little skewed because what we've seen in the last 3 years, who did we see at an age where we hadn't had success? 2 of the greatest quarterbacks of this era.
Right.
Peyton Manning first. And the reason why Peyton stopped playing in Denver wasn't because he couldn't play, but because of his neck. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Well, in his arm.
He lost some of his physical talent.
Yes.
He still had the desire and the mental preparation, all that, the physical talent. When you get to the point where you start to look at yourself and go, you know what, I'm more of a hindrance. I looked at myself on film one day, and I thought it was a young player playing in my spot. And, you know, we were just in sweatshirts. We didn't have jerseys on, no numbers. And I'm looking, it's a snowy day in Denver, and I was like, boy, that dude, who is that? That guy sucks. And I was like, oh, shoot, that's me. Like that, and it was like that when you get to that realization that you're like, you know what, I'm more of a hindrance to my team than I am a help. But when you finally get there, that's a hard thing to accept.
You are in the minority for recognizing that. I think the problem that a lot of these guys are going to have is they don't recognize it. And if they do, they're not talking about it.
And I'm not sounding the alarm, and I'm not saying any of these 3 are more of a hindrance than a help. But I do wonder if we're going to look back on this year and say, oh.
Okay, let me tell you the problem with this, though. Here's the problem with this and why this happens. Because you become so dependent on that guy and his ability and his ability to cover warts, that you let things slide. Eli Manning, you put all kinds of people on the outside. You didn't address the running game. You didn't address his offensive line. Phillip Rivers, you watch that film. Go watch him. That guy feels like he needs to hang 45 points on people, and you look at
risks accordingly.
Right, and you look at the people that are around him, offensive line. weapons outside. There's just not a whole lot. I mean, there's some nice possession guys.
Right.
You know, Keenan Allen's a really good player. Does anybody fear like, oh my goodness, how am I going to cover him when he lifts the top of coverage? Not one person has ever said that about Keenan Allen.
No.
So you start looking at these quarterbacks, and I think it's the same thing that happened to Peyton Manning. You become so dependent on Peyton Manning that you trick yourself into believing you've got better players than you really have. And then guess what? When that guy declines, you start to realize, you know what? The players we have around him really aren't all that good. He just covered a lot of warts, and I think those quarterbacks are dealing with some of those situations right now.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from First Things First, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.